I don't know if you feel the same way or maybe it's just me, but I kind of feel like there's a million and one techniques and ideas out there, so it's easy to forget about some of our favorites. That's why I'm so excited for today's video. I have teamed up with my 4 crafty friends, Justine, Laurel, Ardith, and Mary. Each of us are going to be sharing 3 different techniques that we love but often forget about. Here's a little secret. I have a bonus technique at the end of my video, so stay tuned. I'm also going to be sharing lots of helpful tips throughout the video, so stick around so you don't miss any of it. I'm going to be linking Justine's video in the end screen and in the description box. My first technique may surprise you because it's just so simple, so let's get into those techniques. This first technique is ink blending with distress oxides. When these first came out, I bought almost all of them, and I'm not sure why over the years I forget about this simple technique, but I do. I'm going to start off by grabbing my cardstock from my bin and then choosing some colors for a bright, fun background. I'm actually going to pull out this mat that I had to have but never use to see if it will help hold the paper in place while I ink blend. I'm also going to be using the grip mat from Tim Holtz for my ink pads. These are supplies I forget to use, so I thought this video would be a great time to pull them out. I really like these makeup brushes from Amazon. They give me a nice smooth blend and they don't break the bank. When ink blending, I think the paper you use matters just as much or even more than the ink blending tools that you use. I like to use Distress Heavy Stock, but I also like Nina 110 and Bristol Smooth. I'm going to add the ink a little lighter where the next color is going to meet. This way they blend really well. When I add the next color, I will slightly overlap it into the previous color. The first color I used was Picked Raspberry, and this one I'm using now is Fossilized Amber. I do use a different brush for each color, so getting them cheap on Amazon really helps so I can have a bunch of them on hand. This next color is Twisted Citron, and again, I will lightly blend the color into the previous color. I also go over the first couple colors with a designated brush to even out the color even more before moving on to the last color, which is Peacock Feathers. Now, I am loving the Tim Holtz grip mat to hold my inks in place. And at first I really liked this waffle flower mat, but over time it didn't want to hold the paper anymore and I was getting really frustrated. So if you have any good solutions for holding down paper, leave them down in the comments, and maybe finding a grip mat that actually works will be the topic for my next crafty crowdsourcing video. Now, ink blended backgrounds really aren't my thing as is, so I like to add some splashes of water to give the backgrounds a little more interest. This is really easy to do, so I take my spray bottle and fill my hand with a bunch of water and then let some of it drip down and then flick off the rest of the water onto the paper. Now off camera, I ink blended another background, but long ways. This way I can get 2 cards from this one background. I'm going to be adding some water splashes to this background as well to give it a little bit more interest. I absolutely love the oxide effect you get when you add water to the backgrounds. Here's a closer look at the background, and I'm actually going to be using these backgrounds for my second technique. This technique is great because it will have you using all of your embossing folders and unused backgrounds you might have laying around. I'm going to run my backgrounds through my Spellbinders machine with this Altenew 3D embossing folder. I absolutely love this embossing folder. My background did crack a little bit, but I did forget to spritz it with some water, and to be honest, it gives the background a little more interest. After I have embossed my backgrounds, I am going to level up the embossing by using some white pigment ink. And this is the second technique I often forget about. I'm using some white ink from scrapbook.com, but any white pigment ink will do. And if you're doing a lot of this technique, it's good to have a re-inker on hand. This technique is so simple to do because you just swipe, yes, swipe the ink over the raised embossed areas, and the white ink only gets on the raised parts of the background, making the design stand out more. Now, you're not smushing the ink onto the background, you're just very lightly wiping that ink right over top of those raised areas. If you smush the ink down, you're going to get way too much white pigment ink all over your background. Now, before I start assembling my cards, I thought it would be fun to show you some of the backgrounds I have done in the past using this technique. My idea is to inspire you to get out what you have in your own stash instead of feeling like you need to go shopping. Chances are you may have these exact supplies or something similar. So go shop your stash and start creating. Well, of course, after you watch all 5 videos. Now remember, I'm going to be sharing a bonus technique at the end of this video, so don't go anywhere. I'm going to show you how to easily turn these backgrounds into cards, but first I need to rough up the edges, and I'm going to do this with some scissors. I rough up the edges to all 3 of my backgrounds, and now where's my splatter squad at? Because you know it's time to add some splatters to these backgrounds. No project is complete without some splatters, and I like to use the Dina Wakley Gloss Spray in white. And I do this by just taking the nozzle out of the bottle and just adding the splatters that way. Make sure that you rotate your backgrounds, this way you get splatters from all directions. Alright, since we're talking about forgotten techniques, again, I decided to pull out my dustiest supplies, and sadly, it's my faith-based supplies. I do not use these as often as I should. This Jesus Loves You sentiment is from Erin Lee Creative, and I will have the links down to her shop in the description box. I'm going to add my sentiment to some vellum using the fine tip bottle with some Barely Art glue in it. This fine tip helps ensure I don't get too much adhesive on the back of the vellum, because nothing's worse than seeing adhesive through vellum. I added the embossed panel to a card base with some double-sided adhesive, and then added the sentiment to finish off this card. I'm going to take the embossed panel I cut in half and add the smaller panel to some vellum with a slight border, just to give the cards an extra something. I added to my card base, and for my focal point on this card, I decided to use a leaf die from Pink Fresh Studio along with a butterfly sticker from Open Journey. This is another small faith-based shop that I have a lot of supplies from that don't get used. I stamp out a Bible verse from a stamp set from Erin Lee, and this card is complete. For my next card, I'm going to use this cross die from Erin Lee, and I'm going to adhere it to the background. I'm also going to be using a sticker Bible verse from Open Journey. And just like that, this card is complete. Now it's time for my third technique, and this one is using sprays. You're probably thinking, you use sprays all the time, Tiffany. Yes, I do, but I use spray stains. But I often forget about the Distress Oxide sprays, probably because of how I organize them. I don't really like to use oxide sprays on their own. I actually like to pair them up with all of my spray stains. I'm not going to share how I created this full background. I have lots of videos on how to create backgrounds using spray stains on my channel. I just wanted to share a little glimpse of how I added some of the color with the spray stains, and then how I can add the oxide sprays just to give a little extra something. These are more opaque and they stand out over top of the spray stains. When I was creating this background, I remembered how much I love using the Distress spray stains and oxide sprays together, so I'm going to try to make it a point to use my oxide sprays way more from now on. I'm just splattering on the oxides to the background, and then I'm going to lightly spritz them with a little bit of water to help them move around a little bit. The oxides again are more opaque, so they can easily overpower the whole background. So you really need to be careful on how much you add to your background. I used over 10 different sprays in this background, so I'm going to list them in the description box down below if you're wondering what colors I used. At this point, I had no idea what I was going to do with this background, so I just decided to use some of my favorite stamps and add a little bit of stamping around the background, and I used some archival ink for that. Now that the background's done, I spent probably about 6 hours off camera trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do with it, and that led me to my bonus forgotten technique, sewing on my projects. Now I have to be honest, I often think about doing this, but most times I'm just too lazy to pull out my sewing machine. Now to sew on paper, it's been pretty easy, at least with my sewing machine. I haven't had too many issues. I stitched some of the sides of the background, and I also did some sewing on all of the elements I'm going to add to my card, including this vintage crochet window cover. I love adding different textures to my projects. I even added some stitching to this leaf die cut that I'm going to add to my card. I love the texture and interest just a little bit of sewing can add to my project. And you could definitely change out the thread color to match your project, but I just stick with black because I honestly have no idea how to rethread the machine. This is the extent of my sewing skills. I'm going to start layering my elements onto my card, and the stamped flowers are from All in Create, and the butterfly is from Tim Holtz. I added some frosted crystal to the butterfly to add even more texture. I adhere my panel to my card base, and you know exactly what time it is. It's splatter time. I'm going to add some white splatters to finish off this card. And just like that, I used so many supplies and techniques I've forgotten about in this video, but the fun isn't over yet, because Justine is going to be sharing her 3 techniques she loves but often forgets about in this video right here. Head on over to her channel so that we can see what she has in store for us. I'll see you there.